Gentlemen and the odd lassie, welcome to the shop. Okay, so you're thinking of getting a N52, which is used on many BMWs. This particular model is the E90 3 Series 328, and you're asking yourself what to look out for. Well, if something's failed, it's going to be obvious, and actually there's nothing to look out for. However, there's a lot of things to do after you purchase the car. Stay tuned and I'll explain. Okay, this is the infamous water pump here. You got to remove the front splash shield. You see all the hoses and how tight it is. You need to remove or lower the strut bar to access to replace it. Okay, so it's just in front of the rack here. Now, they can fail pretty much at all mileages. I mean, people have had them fail as early as like 50,000 kilometers, and they've lasted up to 250. Now, the good thing about these cars is they go into what's called a limp mode, which limits the power, and by doing so, it prevents the car from overheating, and it turns the fans on really high. So this is rare, right? Most cars, when they overheat, they could warp ahead. But many people have reassured me that, you know what, when that happens and it overheats, it doesn't happen with this car, actually. I should correct myself. It just goes into a limp mode to prevent that condition. Whereas most cars will overheat. Yes, it'll run hot, but I technically wouldn't call it an overheat, because it doesn't warp anything. It just runs hot, but it's smart enough to detect this condition and run into this limp mode. So if you're the type that will baby the car when the water pump fails and drive it to a safe spot, and you have, let's say, roadside assistance, then don't worry about replacing it. But let's say if your wife is like mine and she ignores all the warning signals, well, then you might want to inspect this. Apparently is a date code on them, but I mean, it's up there and it's just out of my eyesight. You know, maybe with mirrors I can see that, but you know, if you can get the service records, if it has been changed, apparently the newer version is much more robust. So you won't have to worry about it. But once again, these cars should prevent themselves from extreme overheat. As long as you baby it, it'll go into the limp mode, and you know, you call your roadside assistance, which I have. So for me, I'm not going to change it. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is your oil pan gasket. A lot of people confuse weepage with a leak. Okay, this is what I call weepage. The car only has 100,000 kilometers. It doesn't leak on my floor. Yeah, it's a little wet, but I'm not losing any oil. The oil level does not move. I would not replace it. Don't worry about it. BMWs are known to be leaky. Okay, but this is weepage. It's only one localized area. You can see it here, very little. I mean, that's just basically keeping the gasket almost moisturized so it doesn't dry out. That's the way I look at it, because it's not actively dripping. I'm not losing oil. Okay, you see, this is a soft aluminum, so I think what happens over time, the metal relaxes a little and it allows some leakage. And yes, they get hard, and these cars run apparently hot and they dry up, but you know what, there's nothing wrong with this gasket. It's fine. And if it was easy to replace, sure, but it's not. You have to drop this subframe here, if you can see it, and by doing that you have to support the engine with an engine lift. Okay, so it's not an easy job. You need to get an engine support brace, which you know, it's a $100 tool. Not many people have, and there's a lot of things to remove, and you see how many fasteners there are. Hopefully you can see this. I'm getting squished between my roll cart and the floor here. I don't have much room. Okay, so there's lots of fasteners. It's not an easy job. Okay, and I would change it if you notice drastic losses of oil, or if your floor, your garage floor is getting wet with oil. I do not have that condition. Okay, so once again, infamous oil pan gasket, and that's what it looks like. Oh, and by the way, here is my new cable installed. Okay, here's my new braided cable, which I just spoke about in a previous clip. Okay, so hopefully I got much better starting now. Okay guys, if you're having starting problems like I am, if you remove the splash shield just in front of the automatic transmission, you're going to see this braided ground cable. Okay, it grounds the chassis to the engine. You see how frayed that thing is? It's green. Well, this is bad, and the way I've diagnosed it is I put a jumper wire from the engine to the chassis, and it started much easier. Okay, so I'll take a video of the new part, but that's where it is. Here you see the transmission. Okay, you just got to remove one splash shield with just a bunch of 8mm bolts, and that's it there. Okay, so this is the driver's side, and it's one splash shield, not the front splash shield, the mid splash shield. Okay guys, so this is your transmission. There's one splash shield to remove to access it. This is the GM transmission. The splash shield is just after the front splash shield. And there's your drain bolt, which is a hex. And the fill bolt is somewhere over there. I don't have access here, I'm running out of room. One key thing to note, your fill has to be when the car is running, okay? That's a little tricky and unusual, from my experience at least. And you see, this is where the splash shield attaches, these face-offs, okay? And to get around that, you just rotate the splash shield 90 degrees, okay? Splash shield's on the ground there. It's a small splash shield, okay? I recommend doing this every 60,000 kilometers, okay, because your transmission is a fluid coupling, so the fluid sees a lot of heat. So as a preventive maintenance, it's good to do. Even though these transmissions are very durable, it's a wise thing to do. The first time I did it, I didn't change the filter, you know, but it is advisable to take off the pan. I mean, my car only has 100,000 kilometers, so I don't think it's a big deal. But the next time I change it, I will take off the pan with all these bolts and change the filter and take out the metal shavings. Okay, this is a GM transmission. It's actually made in France, believe it or not. And it's actually very good. It responds well. It shifts pretty quick and it's fairly reliable. But with all transmissions, it's a good idea to do. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is your DS shifter, which I love in these cars. It's very aggressive. To me, it shifts quick, even though it's a slush box. So that is when you put the shifter into D, then you switch it over to your plus and minus. You can control the shifting much quicker, and if you can keep it in DS, it keeps the revs higher. Great feature, right? Well, the problem is the wires to the DS portion of the module are too short, but the fix is really easy. So you want to address this before you cut the wires, and you will cut them if you use it a lot and you don't make the fix. And the fix is easy as unclipping something underneath here to give the wires more length. The actual harness is long enough, but they clipped it in a little too tight, and it thereby straining the wires. So the good thing is, fixing this isn't hard. You just have to lift up here. You have to lift up here and you have to remove the shift knob. To remove the shift knob, you put in neutral and you just push the button and lift up like you're gonna hit yourself in the head. But don't, be careful, but it's really tough. You gotta push on the button and lift up as hard as you can. I put a bit of grease so next time it goes in easier, and if I have to remove it, it's obviously easier. There is nothing to unbolt. So once this cover comes off by taking the shift knob and lifting up here, there's numerous connectors you have to remove, and then you'll see the harness which you have to, the clip you have to undo to lengthen the wires. So you want to do this before the wires get cut, otherwise you got a much bigger job. There's some videos I followed. I won't make my own. Unfortunately, I didn't take a video of it at the time, but there's videos that I used that can explain everything. But you want to do this ASAP. I have 100,000 kilometers on mine, and the wires were perfect. So luckily I was able to extend them. But if the previous owner used DS a lot, you might not be lucky. Okay, guys?
Okay, so that is the wiring harness that you need to inspect for charring. There is a recall for it, but it would be a good idea to check it now. If it's discolored, don't drive your car. It can start on fire. Okay? If it's okay, take out the motor and lubricate the front and rear bearing with some oil. Okay? It'll prevent it from seizing because you get a little moisture in the air intake. So once again, that's the wiring harness. I can't really see well down here, but I think you get the idea. It's orange and brown wire. I've inspected mine, I removed it. I put a bit of dielectric grease to prevent any corrosion. And there goes the light. So that's all I can film for now. To inspect the motor, you're going to want to remove this lower cover. Okay, under the glove box. See, there's a hole for a T20 there and a T20 there. And there's the light switch there. You don't need to remove it, but if you service the motor, you should remove this whole piece. But if you're just inspecting it, well, you can leave it like that and look underneath. You're gonna have to do some major contortion though on your back. And to remove the motor, you're gonna have to remove that duct that I showed you in the other video. Okay guys, so that's a T20 Torx. Okay, so one of the first things you need to look out for, and one of the most important things, is oil leaks. And you're wondering yourself, what's the big deal about an oil leak? Well, I'll explain. First of all, this oil filter housing gasket, they call it the OFHG, that can leak. Okay, so look out for that. The next is the actual valve cover. Okay, you see it's covered here by this engine cover, but I think you guys all know what a valve cover gasket is. Okay, it spans the head of the car, and to replace it, you're going to need to remove this cowling that houses the air filter for the intake. For the cabin. Okay, why are these two oil leaks very important? Stay tuned. Okay, listen up, guys. If the oil gets on that belt, this is your serpentine belt here, from either the valve cover gasket or the oil filter housing gasket, that belt will degrade. Oil is not compatible with rubber belts, and when it degrades, it'll snap and it can actually get sucked in the engine. It'll destroy the front seal. At the very minimum, you'll have a massive oil leak. I've seen reports where the actual belt sucked in the engine and destroyed the timing chain. Okay, so you don't want that. Any leaks up on the engine here, address ASAP. The next thing you want to look for is the belt positioning on the tensioner pulley. You can see here, this one's pretty good. It's riding a little over the tensioner pulley, but when they start riding heavily over towards, when I say over, towards the front of the engine, you can get belt mistracking and you can throw that belt. And once again, get sucked in the engine, destroy the front seal. The cause for that is the actual tensioner
and the free rock in the bearing. Okay, so you just want to replace the tensioner and the pulley itself. And to do that, there's a Torx here. It's, I believe, a T60. I had to buy a T60 to use this. That's a rare, it's a very high size for a Torx. So you're gonna have to buy yourself a T60 to release the serpentine belt, and then just to replace this tensioner, which is an ENA. I think the OEM is ENA. Okay, so make sure you do that, guys. Once again, belt mistracking is the key here, and of course you always want to put a new belt after. Even though these belts can last, I mean, if they're mistracked or they're full of oil, they're going to cause big problems. Okay, unfortunately, this problem on these cars I know the least about. The whole community knows the least about. There's a recall on this part here. Zoom in. That's the PCV heater. Just show you where it is in relation to everything else. So between your second and third runner there, that thing can cause fires. I don't understand how it can cause a fire with the engine off, but apparently it can. Key on, definitely there's power to that. Apparently even key off, they've started fires, maybe if it's faulty. That heater shorts and will cause a fire and melt your engine and melt your house. So it's very nerve-wracking. I really don't like being in this situation. I want to keep my car inside. I don't see how it can have power off, but nonetheless, there is a recall. It just started. There's been so many cars made with this PCV valve that the parts are obviously on back order. So anyways, by the time you get this, you get your car, hopefully the parts will be in stock and not like the current group of people waiting for this. So it's very nerve-wracking. Nonetheless, if you see any melting or plastic burning there or any discoloration, I wouldn't drive the car. Mine looks okay, and apparently if they fail early in their life. So if they're going to fail, they've already failed. They say between 2 to 8 years, but that's just hearsay. Anyways, guys, so that's your PCV valve heater. It's under recall, so you do not have to pay anything to fix it. Just be mindful if you're parking the car inside and if you see smoke.